All right, guys, we are now live on YouTube.
Awesome.
Hi.
All right, well, we are at 2 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to our first Tuesday Table Talk. All right, guys.
Yay!
All right. Well, I am so excited to welcome our audience today to the Patient Advocates Transforming Healthcare First Tuesday Table Talk. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Hala Dura, and I am the founder of the Patient Advocates Transforming Healthcare, or as we like to call ourselves, PATH. And we recently came together as a group, as a diverse coalition of independent patient family engagement leaders, really looking to transform healthcare by using our expertise and our experience. And so I am super excited that we've launched this weekly web series where we're going to dive into all issues of healthcare and patient family. So thank you all again for joining us. As I mentioned, I am the patient group. I'm also a patient family engagement consultant and advocate. So I really have been involved in this work for several years. I came to this work as a mother of a daughter who has had 2 liver transplants and a bone marrow transplant. And I also come to this work as someone who is a first-generation American born to immigrant parents who came to this country 50 years ago. So I hope to share all of that experience, everything I do in healthcare. Now, I know we use the word advocates in PATH, and I want to just make sure everyone knows that using that term very broadly, our work is really steeped in advocacy. However, we are leaders in a lot of different facets of healthcare, whether it's patient safety, patient experience, health equity, quality improvement, and so on and so forth. But at the root of all that is our advocacy for having patient, family, caregiver, and community voice in the work of healthcare. And I am joined today by my 2 esteemed colleagues. I'm super excited to introduce Dr. Natasha Washington, who is the president and CEO of ATW Health Solutions, which she named after her late father, may he rest in peace, who died from a preventable medical error surgery. And I think it's always important to highlight some of our stories and experiences that bring to work. Natasha's passion for social justice, health equity, patient safety, and measurement really drives her at least 2 decades plus in this work. And I'm really honored to have her as a colleague and a friend, more importantly, and as part of PATH. So welcome, Natasha. I also want to welcome Greg Merritt, PhD. He is the CEO of Informational Interviewing and Patient as Partner, LLC. He's also a grateful survivor of cardiac arrest and heart attack, and a proud first-generation PhD grad, which helped him escape childhood poverty. And he's also our resident questionologist. So we're really fortunate to have Greg as part of our PATH team and have him on this conversation today. So today's conversation is patient family engagement, PFE, the way forward. And I can tell our audience this discussion about a week or 2 ago is much different than how it may go today. And so I want to say to everyone, it's a moment in our history, in our country, that we have to acknowledge what's going on right now and really, really take to heart the messages that are coming through and acknowledge pain, suffering, and start to really change the course of our actions. So today's conversation will be a little bit different than what we initially planned for, but I think the moment calls for it, and we must respond to that moment. When we talk about PFE 3.0, many of you may say, well, what was 1.0? What was 2.0? Well, briefly, very briefly, because we could spend hours and hours breaking that down, PFE 1.0 was saying, hey, yeah, maybe we should have those patients, ask them some questions. Maybe they can come in and tell us if this paint on the wall is working for us, or how do we put up signs in the hospital for wayfinding, or maybe how does the food fit? PFE 2.0 kind of went another level where we started to hear about patient family centered care, patient family engagement, patient experience, and patient family advisory councils. And so we went from, yeah, it's kind of nice to have that perspective, to let's try to get that perspective a little bit more hardwired into our system. But I think PFE 3.0 has to look a whole lot different. PFE 3.0 needs to be built on the humanity experience. And I know in healthcare, we throw around patient experience, consumer experience, which I have very strong opinions about the word consumer being used. But I think we have to start at that place of humanity. We have to get beyond the four walls of the healthcare system and the hospital. And we truly have to build trust, mutual respect, and very importantly, community partnerships. That is key to moving us forward. Now, COVID-19 didn't bring any issues into the fold that we didn't already know about. All it did was magnify and amplify them. It made us fall deeper into the existing cracks we already knew were there. And it broke us. And I'm not using that word lightly. It broke us. Health equity, health disparities, social determinants of health. We have to start calling those for what they are and acknowledge them. We have to say what it is: racism, implicit bias, structural and institutional racism. We certainly aren't immune to it in healthcare, as we are not immune to it in our society as a whole. So how can patient-family engagement move forward? How can we get to PFE 3.0? Well, guess what? We got to have the honest, messy, and raw conversations first. We have to start saying those words that are painful to say, but the truth must be told. Whose voices are at the table right now in patient-family engagement and in healthcare? Whose voices continue not to be? Why? And that's the question we have to start getting to the root to. Why, and how do we change it? I see that, since the news of the unfortunate murder of George Floyd and the protests that have raised our nation's conscience once again to things we've known have always been there, many statements have been put out about racism and police brutality as public health issues. We have a lot of health systems that are speaking very loudly, and healthcare organizations, which is a great first step. But that can't be where it stops. We have to move past just statements and start to really have those deep, honest, raw conversations within our systems, because this is the moment that we have to respond to. We have a lot of wonderful, well-meaning individuals, organizations, and systems that are in this work in healthcare. But we have to start to make the safe space to listen and to allow change. If we don't do that, then the statements will just remain statements on social media, on websites. We have to move beyond that. We talk about now wanting to get patients and families back to healthcare systems, to feel trust, to feel like it's okay. Well, if we don't start making safe spaces within our own systems, with our staff, how are patients and families and communities going to return to those health systems when there's decades of mistrust, especially of those who come from communities of color, of those who are marginalized, of those who are vulnerable? So there's no easy answers here. There are no easy answers, but we have to start now talking about it. It's going to take bravery, it's going to take leadership, and it's going to take a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But we have to do it now. And so, Natasha and Greg, I'm going to stop there. But what I would love to hear from both of you is reflecting on this moment we currently are living. How do we move forward? How do we get to PFE 3.0? How do we get to engaging communities across the nation beyond that? And I'm going to start with Natasha first.
Hala, can you hear me okay? You can hear me good? Okay. Can you say something back to me so I can make certain that I hear you audibly?
Hello?
Okay, got you. Perfect.
Okay.
There's also a few people, just to let you know, that are attempting to actually watch this live. I'm getting a few messages from some colleagues that they don't see it live streaming. So I don't know if there's maybe a message that you might want to send out or check that while we're on. But there are a number of folks that are having difficulties accessing the stream. So let me just first thank you for your heroism. Thank you for being courageous and as you know, as many of these talks that I've done over the years, often there's this framework or this agenda that we kind of go off of, and I certainly appreciate you adhering to the call of today and what's going on in our environment today, and being brave enough to say, okay, well, I know this is not going to be scripted, but we got to talk about it. And so thank you for that. When I think about patient-family engagement, specifically as it relates to what we're witnessing in today's environment, the first thing that really comes to my mind is the fact that when I started in this work, there was absolutely nobody, and I mean nobody, well, maybe one other person, Regina Grismith, that looked like me and that had a similar background as myself and that I could connect to in terms of, similarities. And when I saw the scores of people, that had been involved in this work for decades, clearly a decade before I even, got into it. So I have been working in the healthcare space, for over 2 decades, but specifically in the space of PFE, it has been just a little bit over a decade. So when I got into the work, right, I discovered that there were just, and I mean it when I say scores of people that were sitting at the table, shaping agendas, and not one of them represented a community of color. Not one of them represented the voice of America, meaning the diversity of America, right? And so that in and of itself was the sense of urgency for me to stick around. Now, here's the deal. I stuck around in my own sense of being courageous because one does not understand what it's like being a Black woman in my shoes, raising Black children, married to a Black man, dealing with the issues that we're dealing with today that, quite frankly, have been pervasive since I can remember. I can literally recall my very first, I'll call it discriminatory moment, where I knew as a young child in kindergarten that I was being treated differently, and that it was not because of any other reason than the color of my skin. I recall that I recall moments throughout my educational pathway over the years, high school, and even beyond, where as a Black woman, it wasn't about my intellect. And it wasn't about my ability to be able to do the work. It was all about challenging me because of who I was and what I represented, and how people not only couldn't connect, but refused to connect with what that meant, you know? I mean, and I make light of it, now, but back in the day, I remember, like third grade, fourth grade, and we were avid churchgoers, and we were members of the Baptist church, but I went to a Catholic school, and I remember singing, wanting to sing in the Catholic choir, and so I went to rehearsal, and I remember literally being ostracized in that choir practice because what I knew as singing in the choir was very different from what the Catholic Church knew as singing in a choir. And as opposed to meeting me where I was ostracized and removed from the choir. And I remember that same day, I walked home from school, because this is an after school practice. I walked home from school from one suburban city to another. And I know I clearly walked probably a good 20 miles one way to my grandmother's house. And by the time I got there, it was clearly dark at night. I mean, like, and so we ask ourselves the question, so, what is it that's going on today that's so different? Ain't shit different, excuse my French. The only thing that's really different here is the level of exposure that is happening because of video, because you do have individuals that are doing the right thing and exposing a lot of this. But please hear me when I tell you this shit happens every day. And so when I think about, what we're doing with patients and coming into this work, one of the first questions I said was, one patient isn't all patients. And so because I'm reading some of these, concept papers and white papers, and this one has an opinion and that one's telling me this and that one. And I'm saying, okay, but this doesn't fit. Like, this is not a one size fits all approach. And how are we going to move forward with an effort like this? And we're really not even reaching or talking about everybody. So I think the biggest thing for me is, one, the acknowledgement of our wrongs, right? And then acknowledgement of our wrongs is also acknowledgement of how we can do better, meaning what I've done wrong so that I can do better. See, because there are a lot of people that know that there's a Dr. Natasha Washington that exists, and they've heard her voice, and they know that she stands for equity, and they know that she deals with PFE. But when it's time for them to get together and talk about, oh, we need to put out a new this, oh, we need to put out a new that, I may not necessarily be invited to the table because of white privilege, because they're not ready for my voice to be a part of that. And the reason why they're not ready for my voice to be a part of that is, number one, because I'm not singing their same tune. And then number two, it becomes an economics thing for them, because, that's just one more person that they got to split the pie with. Let's just be frank, right? So at the end of the day, a lot of times we just don't do what we're supposed to be doing because of those two very reasons, right? And then, so even for the organizations that have, to some sense, begun to engage or try to do, what they'll do is they'll go and pick I'll call it a token individual. What I mean by token individual is that you're not going to put up somebody who knows. You're not going to put up somebody who's trained. You're not going to put up somebody who's been educated and well-versed and spoken in this space. Because, see, I know it deeper than being Black and brown. I know it textbook. I know it research. I know it lived experience. And it's not too many people that can beat me at that conversation. And so you'd rather not bring me to the table and elect another brown person who doesn't know, and for the lack of their naivety and their inability to even understand that they're being used, they'll sit at the table and be a part of the conversation and really not be able to contribute on the level in which they should be. Well, I should say contribute on the level in which an expert would be able to. Right. But then your organization or your health system can say, well, we got diversity because we got blah, blah, blah. So don't get me wrong, because one of my first plights was to make certain that there were other people that looked like me around the table, other people that had experiences like me that were around the people, because I can't do this by myself. So please, this is not about Natasha, right? There are scores of other people who know this, who are ready to be a part of the work. We just don't invite them to the table. So let's talk about inviting people to the table. So there's a concept called concordance, like patient provider concordance. So that's where you have patients and providers that have similar backgrounds, that may be of similar race and ethnicity, may have similar community, experiences, so on and so forth. That same level of concordance is necessary in order to advance us as a people. What do I mean by that? I get sick and tired of people calling me all the time, asking me about diversity and inclusion. Because my question is to you, who do you have at the table to represent diversity and inclusion? Right? As opposed to you trying to be the subject matter expert and you then calling on me to ask me a few questions so that you can fill in your blanks, and then you take it and advance it and shape equity to be what you want it to be. Right? You'd rather have either no one at the table or someone who doesn't know at the table. Right? And so we really got to get to this point where we acknowledge the level of entitlement that really shapes, how we got here, so that we can really begin to open up the floodgates and allow the right voices at the table who can help shape PFE 3.0. Right? So this is getting another, 10,000 voices, right, as a part of that process. And for none of us, and I'm talking about me, to be so caught up in oneself that we don't even open up the door. Because see, that was the big thing for me. It's like I'm there and I see what's going on. Oh no, I got to pull somebody else through, and I got to pull another one through, because I can't do all of this. There's no way that I can be, in a million different places. And then for those people that are at the table shaping the conversation, I'm just saying, why aren't you doing the right thing? I am so tired of seeing this bland, vanilla PFE stuff that continues to come out month after month, year after year, not shaped around what patient really means. And we're talking about people. We're talking about people. And I am a very different person than you, Hala. I'm a very different person than Greg. And that's the beauty of it all. But what we want to dumb it down to, or we distill it down to, patient-family engagement being this, this very experience that's a one-size-fits-all, and it's just not true. So if we're going to move this thing forward, we have to truly understand that diversity and inclusion concept, one, and then beyond diversity and inclusion, you really got to make an effort to not put token people at the table. I'll say it again, to not put token people at the table, but put learned experts that can challenge you. See, I got people, that's the reason why I love you, Howard. We can challenge each other all day and night. We'll debate each other all day and night. We don't have a problem with that, right? Because through our ability to be able to challenge one another, both of us grow as individuals, right? And so we have to get to the point where we're able to bring people to the table that truly look like representation of this country. And then we have to give them a real and a meaningful voice in this. And so, and I'll say one last thing, and I don't know that everybody's ready to do that, right? Because engaging Natasha is very different from engaging some of my colleagues, right? Because their conversation is very aligned. My conversation is very different. And so because people aren't, they don't want to, that's not part of their agenda. That's really not what they're looking for. It's a harder engagement to happen, right? It's almost like talking to although I'm speaking English, it's almost like, me speaking another language. Like you really have a true inability to be able to connect with me on that level. And so I think that, we got to acknowledge diversity and inclusion, make certain that there's concordance in terms of individuals that are at the table, and give them a real voice in the matter, if we're really trying to move this thing forward. Because, trust you me, there are going to be 1,000 other people that take that and interpret it into something else that they want it to be, because they're still trying to shape the agenda. But, I believe that those are the core things that we need to do in order to advance this along. To start.
Yes, this is the beginning, and there's so much more to do, but thank you, Natasha, for sharing your thoughts. Greg, I wondered if you could reflect a little bit about, how do we advocate for one another, and how do we acknowledge this as a community of patient family engagement leaders, no matter what our backgrounds are, and speak about it. And also, I know you and I have had conversations too, as well as Natasha and other colleagues. We got to put the resources in. Like, there can't be this continued, well, that person can volunteer their time and that's the first person I go to. If we're building capacity, if we're trying to bring all those voices to the table, it has to come with some dollars and cents behind it. We can't continue to utilize patients, families, caregivers, and community engagement leaders in such a way where their expertise and their experience is not valued across all different levels, including compensation, fair and equal compensation. And so I wonder, Greg, if you can maybe talk a few minutes about, how do we bridge those things?
So thanks, Hala, and thanks very much, Natasha. I think actually probably before I start, I wanted to say first and foremost how important it is to hear what Natasha has to say, and recognize and be obvious about who the system was for. Right, the system is. So I would argue the system isn't broken. The system has been set up exactly for whom it was intended for, and that's for white guys. Right. And when that's the system and you don't figure out a way to restructure the system, we're going to be caught up in this same process over and over. And so for me, as somebody who thinks about this in questions, right? So first and foremost, white guy needs to spend a lot more time learning and listening to people like Dr. Washington, and hearing kind of, let me understand in a deep and empathic way an experience with which I don't and can't fully appreciate and understand. The second is, as you described, Hala, I think it's critical that we figure out mechanisms to get more people in the room. And that requires not simply having people of color to find other people of color and mentor them along. It requires us to rethink the white administration that says, you got to do more from medical school to the process of patient family experience to get to a place where you say, this system represents the best of what we want to be in the United States. And we are far from that now for all the reasons that we see. And that requires us to rethink what role it is that everybody has in the system. So I feel like part of the roles is for me to think about both my background of white kid in poverty. That helps. It gives me a sense of why I care so much about who's at the table, and that the notion of thinking of my brilliant mother who had early heart attacks when she was 36. And if she'd have been asked at that time where we were as a family, would you like to participate in a patient family experience committee? It would have been laughable. One, she wouldn't have gotten asked, but even if she was, we'd say, listen, we're just trying to make sure we get food assistance next week. This is not about like, what could I do to be a bit. So I think we've got to really rethink the kinds of questions we're asking and the role that everybody must play in order to find ourselves into PFE 3.0. And I'll just end with this about, I think we actually have to change the language. For me, if we mean it's going to be patient partnership, it has to be patient partnered care. It cannot be this. So when I hear patient centered care, I look at that and think, well, who else are you talking about? And if we're going to be
Right.
real partners, it's going to require us to think about who's that partnership with. If I'm a new physician, do I have a mentor who can help me to understand an experience of a way in which my background has no knowledge and understanding? And if not, we've got to figure out a way to have that happen.
Absolutely. Thank you. Greg.
Hella, if I could just kind of piggyback on
Sure.
something that Greg said, because he started to go down the pathway of structural inequities, and I so appreciate that, Greg. As a matter of fact, I just want to give honor to my family. On today, we lost my dad's brother, my uncle, to COVID-19, and so when I think about where we are, right, in this storm as a black, as a black community, from dealing with the impact of COVID-19 to dealing, with the reality of where we are as a community within the United States, and what that means in the criminal justice system, what that means in the education system, what that means in the healthcare system. I think that it's also important that PFE 3.0 really begin to look at measuring structural inequities. And what I mean by that is that measuring structural inequities is, basically looking at programs, looking at policies, looking at practices, and empirically expressing all of these things that we do and systems that we have in place, and how equitable are they, or how are they driving the elimination of disparities. And until we begin to really look systematically, right, at this, so you have to understand this issue of disparities, this issue of equity is multifaceted. There is no one answer to this, and there's no one space that we can begin. So what I'm saying is that PFE is it, but it ain't it all by itself. Okay. And until we get to the point where now we're activating the structural levers of our systems, and we are now measuring these things, and we are looking at them in terms of being able to identify barriers, put in place, actions that eliminate those barriers so that we can advance. I think we'd also be doing ourselves an injustice. So I don't want us to leave this call by thinking that, oh, well, we just gonna go get some old brown and black people. We're gonna put them at the table. We're gonna give them a voice, give them a microphone. We're gonna be all good. Will not. It will answer some of this, but it is truly not going to get to the root of this, which is exactly where Greg, and I appreciate Greg for your acknowledgement of just even where you are. Because I'll tell you, most of my white friends and my white colleagues, and I love them all, but most of them, because they did have experiences in poverty, they still won't acknowledge their entitlement. And, isn't that something? Yeah, I just said something. I could probably preach that on a Sunday one day, but they won't even acknowledge their superiority, even in the state of poverty. That's deep. And so what I'm suggesting here is that it is not just about getting to Greg's point, scores of more people, more so we can count and say, oh, I had 10, oh, I had 9. No. We've got to begin to really break down the institutional and structural systems that were designed in such a way to really not reap equitable outcomes. Right. It was designed in such a way. I heard that, and not to get too political on your path show, Hala, but I heard
it's our show.
well, I gotta go there, girl, because you got me on a roll. But it's my understanding that a member of Trump administration basically said the structural or institutional racism does not exist in the policing system. Well, if it doesn't, then help me to understand why a Black man is 5 times more probable to be locked up and in prison than is his white counterpart. What is the difference between the two?
Right.
And please don't tell me it's because the Black man got caught and the white man didn't.
Right.
No,
and the same could be held true in healthcare. In healthcare, as you're talking, measurement is the systems of accountability for healthcare, right?
Absolutely.
That's why we need the measurement. And that's why we need to understand why our African American mothers' maternal morbidity rate is so incredibly high in this country.
And here's the deal.
We are a first world nation.
Let me give you some more. Let me give you some more facts on top of the maternal health issue. So the fact is that even when you stratify by education, even when you stratify by income, okay, that the disparity is still great with African American women in comparison to all others. So in other words, what I'm saying is that see folks that think they know, and they say, oh, well, race ain't got nothing to do with it, color ain't got nothing to do with it. Oh, yes, it does, because that's really what it boils down to. Essentially, the thought process is that they'll say, well, that's because of education. It's because of income. Well, no. Research shows, okay, that when you control for things like education and income, the disparity is still. So then it speaks to the reason why I had 2 preterm babies and why I had 2, let's just get real about the situation. And I think that's where these kids today, when we hear about the protests and where we are, I mean, honestly, I didn't think that I would live in a day where I would see it to this level, but I understand it. These kids are basically saying, Mama, I'm tired of watching you. I'm tired of watching Daddy go through this. We're not going to live in the prison that you all lived in. We are not going to, we've watched you all do what you do, and you've negotiated and you've debated and you pontificated, and a lot hasn't necessarily been done. And so now they're saying enough is enough. And I understand that. And I truly understand that. So I think part of this also is just really getting at where we are and understanding the infrastructure of our systems, and to your point, beginning to hold those systems accountable. It is just not enough for health systems to be sending messages about, oh, we are with you and we're thinking about you, to the Black community. It's not enough, because now I'm looking at that and I'm saying that's the same white leader that's not stratifying his quality and safety outcomes by race and ethnicity because he didn't see it important. That's the same white leader. To Greg's point, that's the same white leader that has literally not transformed any of his programs to really meet the needs of his Black patients, right? Because he didn't see that as a priority. So enough already with all your marketing messages and BS like that, because in today's environment, basically we're saying we're not, I don't know if you watch Roots, but go back and watch it sometime and you'll know what I mean when I say shuffle my feet. That's what slaves do. We're not shuffling our feet no more, and here's, I'm gonna say this because this is so deep from the heart. I'm a professional woman. I've been educated. My parents taught me to go about this movement in a different way because my parents were on the line. I am the granddaughter of a woman who grew up on a plantation. Okay. All right. The granddaughter. Right. So we're not too many generations away from, being sharecroppers, basically, is what I'm saying to you. My parents in their generation had a little bit of a different approach to all of this, right, through the civil rights movement. And so as they raised us, their thought process and mentality was, okay, you guys are going to go to school because now education is open up. You go to school and you get the education, and now you're going to be able to negotiate your way to the top. And basically what we're saying is that you can't even negotiate your way out of this, because the powers that be and the infrastructure, to Greg's point, is established that white men will always win. So in this situation, you'll see even where innocent protesters are now being gassed because the system is designed for them to always win. And so what am I saying? I'm saying that now we as a community have gotten to the point, all bets off. As professional as I can be, it's all bets off. So y'all might want to watch with your invitations that you send me to talk, because it's all bets off at this point. It really is. I mean, I'm being comical about it. You laugh to keep from crying about it, but that's how serious it is. That is how serious it is. All bets off. All bets off.
Yeah. No, the laughing is really just trying to hide the tears and the anger, to be quite honest. And I misspoke before. I meant to say mortality, not morbidity, and my apologies for that. This is where we are, but we can get to where we need to get to. But we've got to dig deep and redesign this infrastructure completely. And all voices need to be at the table and supported and compensated and have the experience, because we need to build capacity. We need to build capacity, and that's the only.
Well, you gotta want capacity in order to build capacity, and you gotta make room, right? Because what is the saying say? If it don't fit, don't force it, right? So the truth of the matter is that we could talk about capacity, but unless you're going to create a real space and a meaningful space for the voice to advance things along, then we're doing it for naught. And as a Black woman, I even have to do the same thing, create capacity among my brothers and sisters in the community when I'm working with health systems in the community, because I need for them to understand, the goals, what's the vision of all of this. So creating capacity is not just for the education and broadening piece of it. It's also, we got to make certain that we have room, to activate them so that they are a part of the solution.
Yeah. So I think we're going to end it there. We will have weekly series of our Tuesday table talks. The conversation will continue. I urge those of you who are watching today, take a moment to think about what we discussed today. Take a moment to take it back to your leaders. If you are in a position of leadership, take a moment to say, this is what I'm going to do tomorrow to start changing the infrastructure. This is what I'm going to do tomorrow to change the system. This is what I'm going to do tomorrow to make a space for those who work in my system, so that I can build trust, I can build respect, and I can build community partnerships, so the community will trust us too. Because we can't build that trust if it's not already there, hardwired into your system. So I thank everyone for joining us today. I know we went a little bit over, but we definitely wanted to make sure we made space for this conversation. Please make space for others. Advocate for others. If you are in a position of leadership, this is your time to speak up, speak out, make a safe space. And I will leave you all with that today. I thank you all for joining us. We will be in touch via LinkedIn and our other methods of communication to post today's conversation, as well as post up some resources for our audience in terms of some of the strategies we spoke of. And Natasha and we will stay on about 30 seconds or more just to make sure the live stream has concluded properly. So we're going to just stay silent. And I thank our audience today for joining us.